Hey guys, welcome back to the show. We go deep into cellular health today, but before we do that, a little bit of housekeeping. Number one, thank you so much for being here. Number two, if you're feeling inspired by this episode, you know what to do. Make sure that you follow or subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you happen to find it on. And if you would be so kind as to leave us a review, that would be hugely helpful, assuming that you're feeling, again, called to do so. And make sure that you share the episode out with your friends and your networks. In this episode of the Biohacking Superhuman Performance podcast with guest Dr. Stephanie Estima, we discuss the importance of heading into menopause in the healthiest way possible. Now, if you're a man listening to this, don't run for the hills yet. You may want to stick around. You might learn a few things, or maybe you want to forward this to one of the women in your life. Now, we're talking about muscle. Muscle can often be thought of as a negative thing for women, as we often are taught early in life not to get too bulky. However, number one, it's a myth that needs to be left totally behind. Number two, we know that muscle is essential for hormonal balance, great body composition, looking amazing, and longevity. And most women really don't actually have to worry about bulking up too much. Trust me, I know. Now, we also dive into the science behind balanced hormones, what steps you can take to make sure you're heading into menopause as a powerful, confident woman, rather than taking it on as if it's some kind of disease. Menopause needs to be thought of as an evolution for your body and mind, not a nightmare situation. Bioidentical hormone replacement therapy can be essential for many women, and we guide you through how to talk to your doctor to get the best treatment possible for yourself. Now, overall, this episode offers guidance on navigating hormonal health, talking to your doctor about what you specifically need, and how to leverage menopause as a growth opportunity, not a season of anxiety and hardship. Now, Dr. Stephanie Estima, the muscle lady, is an expert in all facets of health, including nutrition, fitness, hormones, stress management, performance recovery, longevity, health span, mental resilience, and energy production. She has a special interest in exercise physiology, biomechanics, neuroscience, and performance nutrition. She has spent 19 years in private practice and is a best-selling author, international speaker, and a mother. You can find information about her book and website on her Instagram at dr.stephanie.estima. And now let's jump into the episode. Hey folks, just a quick reminder that all of the information presented in this podcast is for information purposes only. No medical advice, no diagnosing, no treatments suggested here. Before you try anything that you hear about or learn about here, make sure that you check with your medical provider. Welcome to the show, Dr. Stephanie Estima. It is a pleasure to have you here. I've been watching from afar for a very long time.
Oh, I'm thrilled to be here. We've been having a great chat, and we just decided to hit record so everyone else could join in on the conversation. But yes, absolutely thrilled to be here.
Yeah, and so just so the audience knows, we are actually recording remotely, even though we're in the same city, which we were laughing about how our people in Toronto in this space, we don't do a very good job of connecting in person a lot of the time. We're so used to doing it virtually. But anyway, so here we are in the land of currently gray. But we bring the sunshine in and get the show on the road. So, Dr. Stephanie, let's start with, it's funny, like the little bit that I've seen of you, and only because I've been running around myself so much, because you're really out there in a beautiful way. I love your social media and stuff. You talk about muscle a lot. So I think of you as the muscle lady, but at the same time, as I've been looking into more of your work, you're doing a lot of work around this whole area of shifting hormones for women as they're moving through perimenopause and all the different effects. So maybe I'd love to talk about the space that you're in right now and why you're moving into, you're evolving in many ways. I mean, it's a consistent message always, but you've kind of evolved.
Yeah, well, the message sort of evolves in terms of my life stage. I remember when I was in private practice and I was pregnant, all I was doing was taking courses on pediatrics. All I wanted to know was like posture and primitive reflexes and developmental milestones and all of that. And yeah, to your point, my first book, and I'm sure we'll touch a little bit on it, was how to optimize for a woman's fertile cycle, for her menstrual cycle. So in the book, it's called The Betty Body. Just right behind, if you're watching on video, the pink and purple book. We talk all about how to eat, how to train, how to manage stress to optimize your fertility. And in my 40s now, and I wrote that book partly for myself, because I had struggled with just an incredible amount of, now looking back, hindsight's always 2020, is like estrogen dominance, 4 years, terrible PMS, terrible breast tenderness, all the things. The week that my period, sort of the 5 days that I was on my bleed week, I was just completely incapacitated. So I wrote that for myself, part research, but also for my community. And now I'm in my mid 40s. I just turned 46. So I'm on the other side of mid, sort of moving to mid to late 40s. And I'm, my attention has really directed to aging well and how I can preserve some of the foundational principles that have been with me my whole life. So lifting weights and eating well and managing stress for a woman in her perimenopausal and then menopausal years, because that's just the life stage that I'm in, and I'm very interested in researching for myself. Unfortunately, as I'm sure we'll get into, there's just the sparseness of solid clinical literature, or I should say scientific literature, is hard. It's very few and far between. So a lot of the protocols that I have come up with are based on some of the literature, but also my clinical expertise, my time in private practice, what my community is telling me. And that's sort of the definition, if you will, of evidence-based medicine, right? We often hear about, how do we make decisions based on the science? Well, the science is part what is in the literature, which is often behind by anywhere from 10 to 20 years. We take the clinician's sort of clinical expertise and his or her experience and practice. And then you also take the patient's dreams and goals. So all those three circles will overlap, a Venn diagram, if you will, and that's evidence-based protocol. So that's what I am very interested in now as a woman in her 40s, around some of the changing metabolic, physiological, hormonal changes that happen for women as we approach menopause, some of the neurological changes as well, some of the brain changes and the neuromusculoskeletal system changes as we approach menopause, and how we can not look at it as a disease, but understand that there are going to be these changes and how we can prepare ourselves for them so that we don't misinterpret our experience once we get there. I think any clinician, any coach, I say this a lot, any coach worth their salt, any doctor worth their salt will be able to predict for their patients what is going to happen for them, so that as the patient is moving through that experience, they're not feeling scared, or they're not feeling like, gosh, this is new, like no one told me about this, which I think so many women who are listening probably can relate to. Like, gosh, no one told me that my ears were going to itch. No one told me that I was going to have hot flashes overnight, right? Like all these crazy symptoms that nobody has ever really talked about, because menopause was kind of this dirty sort of disease, if you will. It was almost looked like, women would suffer about this in silence. So I'm really hoping to change that narrative and to make it, a process that is beautiful, that's accepted, and that we put into place strategic tools and actions so that as we're moving through it, we can do it with as much love and grace for ourselves as we can.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think that reframing this transition in life as a rebirth, reframing this transition in life as a just moving from one phase into the next, which we are definitely leaving things behind that we love, but we're moving into a new space that offers new opportunities. And I'm a few years ahead of you, and I have to say that when I was going through this, there were not the number of strong women voices advocating and educating and inspiring around this space. And so I just think it's beautiful to see. I think that, the more as women we can kind of come together, support each other, educate each other, and say, hey, it can suck a little bit, at least while you're going through it. But A, you're not alone. And B, there's so much we can do around it. And then another piece I think that I think is important is also communicating some of this information to younger women to help them to hopefully coming to this phase in a better state. Like if you have more muscle coming in, if you are metabolically balanced coming in, if your hormones are in reasonable shape and you've learned to manage your stress, you will have an easier time. So that doesn't mean that the woman in her 40s and 50s who's a bit of a, who didn't have the time and the space to do the work beforehand, it's not that all hope is lost. She just might have to work a little harder. But if we can get to women in their 30s and even their 20s and 30s and help them to understand the value of investing in these pieces of the puzzle now, that it'll just make things so much easier and more seamless moving forward. So and
what growth and what opportunity do we have to go through something that's potentially difficult? So when we get to the other side, if you reflect at any point in your life, any difficult thing that you've done, maybe you've trained for a marathon or the CrossFit Games, or you've gone through a divorce, or you've moved cities, or you've had to learn a new language. Like, there's pain points.
Yeah.
While you're going through that transition. But on the other side, how much opportunity for reflection and growth as an individual is there? And I would love to look and reframe perimenopause and menopause to a larger extent as a growth opportunity.
100%. I love it. So I think that's definitely the way to go, right? Because all of a sudden it all becomes a positive. I mean, the hot flashes maybe less so, but they're manageable, and they can be mitigated with the right tools. So there's so many different there's so many different directions I want to go in here. I mean, there's the nutrition, there's the hormone balancing, the BHRT, all the things. But maybe before we talk about those things, maybe let's talk a little bit about, I think that lean muscle is this big flashpoint for women. And we were just talking about it beforehand. So many women worry about, I don't want to get bulky. I don't want to get big muscles. And the two of us started laughing and said, yeah, you just try. Good luck to you. There are so few women that could actually potentially affect. And frankly, even the women with the big muscles that we see on social media, if you ran into them on the street, probably would just look amazing, right? Like they wouldn't necessarily be so pumped. But maybe let's talk about, women's view of muscle and where and how we maybe need to reframe that as well. Because I think of muscle as sexy personally. I think a woman who's caring, who's invested in that piece of her architecture, if you will, is always going to look amazing. But maybe let's talk a little bit about women's attitudes around muscles and these preconceived notions that, if I do too many bicep curls, I'm going to get giant Popeye arms kind of thing.
Yes. It's like, if I could have the spinach and get those biceps, I would totally do it as well. So, I mean, the first thing, to your point around bulking, I do want to frame this in such a way where we are taking into consideration women of my age, right? So in our 40s, in our 50s, we grew up with. I was saying to you in the show before the show, in the podcast before we started recording, that many of us grew up with this the very very thin, almost androgynous type supermodels. Kate Moss is someone who comes to mind. I remember that sort of waif, waif look when I was growing up. And I remember looking at myself in the mirror going like, my thighs are always going to touch. Like, there's no way. It doesn't matter what does. Yeah. And that's not a bad thing. But, growing up as a young girl, I was 10, 11, 12, kind of around that, pre-teen, teen time where that was the look, and you would hear like ballerinas and models were eating Kleenex and all these like crazy things, right?
Yeah.
So I do want to put this in perspective in terms of, for everybody that's listening, to understand how your cultural influence may be, like the environment that you grew up in may be influencing that, right? So if you grew up, as I did, with Kate Moss as like the supermodel, kind of thing, you're going to be a little bit more resistant to, hitting the gym, right? And even, when I was younger, my mom was doing like step aerobics and, and high low. And, and part of the way that I actually paid for my professional schooling was I became a step instructor. So I was doing the step aerobics, I was doing Tai Bo, I was doing the high low, all the things like those were like, I would pick up these classes before school, after school, so that I could, pay for my tuition. So, and all of that is like cardio, like the way that you lose weight, the way that you become thin. And it was always like thin, is through becoming this cardio bunny. And the weights were for the guys, right? The weights was for Schwarzenegger and all of the bodybuilders. It was never really a place for women. And I do remember that there was like, in some of the gyms, they had like, there are still some gyms that have like ladies only training areas. Mm-hmm. And they would have like 5-pound dumbbells, 10-pound dumbbells, right? Like they would have like weights and like some machines, like a few machines here and there. And then the dumbbells that they would have would like go up to maybe 20 pounds.
And they'd
right?
be pink.
And it's like pink it and shrink it, right? So it's like, let's give you everything in pink. So let's like brand it as female, and then we'll make it smaller. So, and we'll make it lighter in this case. So I also just want to shed some light on maybe where those belief systems come from. Mm-hmm. Now, in terms of the, sort of the truth of the matter is that for 98%, and that's approximate. Okay, there's always going to be outliers, but for the vast majority of women, it is going to be very difficult to become bulky. There are some women who can. There are some women who are more androgen dominant. They're always ripped. These are the women that we love to hate on, right? Because they can eat whatever they want and they always have muscle and they always are lean, right? But for the vast majority of women, that's certainly not the case. And I was just saying to you kind of in our little pre-chat, it's like, I've been lifting weights trying to get bulky for, 2 or 3 decades at this point and not, still not there yet. So the bulky myth, it just needs to go away and die because it is very, very inaccurate for the vast majority of women. I think the other thing that pairs along with it, and I hear this a lot. I mean, I was actually talking about to my next door neighbor who I'm very good friends with. And she was like, God, like your arms, like, how do you, and I was saying, well, I lift really heavy weights. Mm-hmm. And she's like, gosh, like, I just don't think like heavy weights, like, can't I like do it with lighter weights? And I'll say that the short answer is you can, if you maintain intensity, and we'll come back to that. But I think that the lifting heavy piece is also very difficult for women to wrap their head around because they've never been shown how to lift heavy. Mm-hmm. They've never been invited to lift heavy. So they, a lot of weight training programs that are directed towards women sort of have this like 12 to 15 rep range. Yeah. Kind of structure to them. And which is fine. Like you can build muscle there, but that's going to be like a moderate to even like a light in order for you to to rep out 15 reps, that weight is not going to be heavy, right? So when we talk about heavy, and I talk about this in the book a little bit, heavy is like 5 to 7 reps, mm-hmm. right? 5 reps, right? So that's sort of what I want you to be thinking about when we think about like if there's a listener who's like, but what's heavy? It's like something that you can rep out 5 times, and 6 you're probably going to need a spot. 7 you're going to be worried if you can that your muscles are that you're going to fail. Yeah. So that's something that I don't think a lot of women, they'll sort of, and I see this all the time in the gym, and I've just learned to zip my lip and have compassion for people, but they'll sort of go through the motions of like doing a bicep curl or doing an overhead press or doing squats or whatever, but the weight is 10 pounds, 15 pounds, 20 pounds. Like that's not for your legs. Yeah, you need a lot more than 20 pounds.
100%. Well, and it's a mindset and a psychology, right? Like I somehow found my way to CrossFit a number of years ago. Now I've left CrossFit because I got to the point where I felt like I was really just putting my chiropractor's kids through school. Like I just all the time.
I will say, in all honesty, I loved CrossFit. When I was in practice, I was like, where can I set up shop right next to a CrossFit? Because I know all those injuries are going to be coming right next to me. Like they're going to walk right into my door. I mean, I know that's a terrible thing to say, but when that is absolutely true. I mean, CrossFit, a lot lot of injuries because it's all about the WOD. It's all about more, and there's no form. Like I'm sure that there are CrossFit gyms, hopefully, that have abandoned that philosophy, but that's usually what we see. It's like you got to do as many as you can in a minute or whatever it is.
Yeah. Well, it's the concept of high load at high speed to failure, which is a recipe for complete disaster. But anyway, having said that, it is a different mindset. And I think what keeps people in CrossFit is the community that exists around CrossFit.
Gosh, what they've done right is community, because you feel like it's like going to church. Yeah. It's like, I'm going to go see my community. And that's what church actually used to be. It's like, I'm going to go see my community. We're going to socialize. We're going to, sing songs together. And here it's like, we're going to get through this workout together. It's going to be really difficult, but we've all done it together.
Yeah.
That's really bonding.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's where women get left out of the gym, right? They don't, and it's intimidating, but okay. So we're moving into, it's a great conversation, but let's go back to, I want to lean into your genius a little bit, which is all of these things, but so much more. And maybe let's talk about how hormonal changes affect women's ability to build, frankly, it even affects men's ability to build muscle after andropause. But let's talk about the girls for today. Let's talk about how the hormones affect women's ability to build muscle, and also what I call the forgotten tissues, which are the tendons and the ligaments that really get affected by the loss of these hormones, which is often what will, and in a world where a woman gets convinced to go lift weights and maybe she doesn't get the right trainer or whatever, and then she gets injured because those supporting actors, if you will, which are the weaker links, get damaged. And then we can move into the uber tissue, which is, people don't think of it as a tissue, but bone.
Okay. So I want to pre-frame this conversation by saying that you can build muscle at any age. Yes. So whether you are 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, if you have never stepped into a gym, if you are premenopausal, perimenopausal, postmenopausal, you can build muscle at any age. And that we actually used to think very differently around this. Yep. So I remember even when I was in school, it's like, once you get menopause and estrogen drops and testosterone drops, like forget about it. Like it's not happening, like you cannot build muscle. Like you have to get all of your gains in prior to the cessation of your menstrual bleed. And that's simply not true. Mm-hmm. That being said, it's orders of magnitude easier to build muscle when you have sex hormones like estrogen and testosterone. These are anabolic. These are growth hormones when they are in a larger concentration. Okay. So prior to the onset of menopause, we still have, and certainly women in perimenopause are going to say, oh my God, my cycle's all over the place. It is, but you still have cycling levels of these anabolic hormones, testosterone, estrogen. It is much easier to build muscle prior to menopause. Testosterone, I don't think everybody gets this, but I'll say this and I'll keep saying this. This is the most abundant sex hormone in the female body. Yeah. I know you know this. I know you're like, yes,
no, I love that you're saying this because it needs to be said as many times as possible so people get their heads around it.
Yeah. So we phenotypically ascribe estrogen as the female hormone, right? And we will ascribe testosterone as the male hormone. And certainly men have more testosterone than women, but when we look at the concentration within a woman, we have somewhere between 10 to 20 times more testosterone than we do estrogen. Okay. Now, of course, we have more estrogen than our male counterparts do, of course. So testosterone, the most abundant sex hormone. So this is involved in, it's famous for libido, right? It's like, this is why if you are someone who tracks her cycle, there's going to be certain times of the month when, usually in the follicular phase, like kind of day, like from the cessation of bleed week to about day 10 or 12 of your cycle, your receptivity to and your interest in sex goes way up versus guys who are just kind of, and I say this a bit as a joke, it's like they're always down for it. Like I'm going to put my husband out here a little bit. He's going to kill me for saying this, but he's always like, listen, honey, I just want you to know, like, I'm always ready for you. Like, whenever you want, like, I'm always ready to go. Right. But that's because he's a guy, right? So he has higher levels of testosterone. So anyway, testosterone, the point I'm trying to say, famous for libido, okay, famous for sex drive. Also very well known for its role in helping to maintain lean muscle. And it's also driven up after we mechanically stimulate the muscle. So once you go and you lift weights close to failure, doesn't have to be at failure. And this is where that intensity piece will come in. As long as you're lifting close to failure, you are going to be driving up testosterone, depending on your fitness level, somewhere between, 10 hours post to like up to 48 hours post workout. So, as we approach menopause, there can be wildly oscillating levels of estrogen. So sometimes, like for some women, there's no symptoms, and God bless them. For many others, for the majority of us, there can be points sort of earlier in that sort of perimenopausal phase where we run more estrogen dominant, and that's estrogen dominant again relative to another hormone called progesterone. So progesterone helps chill us out. It helps reduce the receptivity of estrogen receptors in the breast. It helps with, you were talking about bone. When we talk about bone health as we age, we want to be thinking about the turnover rate of bone, right? So in the show before the show, you were talking about osteoblastic activity, which is the bone. These are the cells that are involved in building new bone. We want to keep that high relative to osteoclastic activity, which are the bones that these resorb the bone, these break down the bone. So as we age, that blast to clast ratio can change under the influence of estrogen. Estrogen promotes osteoblastic activity. So all that to say is, over the course of perimenopause, and then certainly after menopause, there is a trend downward of our total estrogen and our total testosterone. So these are some of the changes that we're up against. And certainly if you are not doing things like lifting weights, you are not going to be mechanically driving that post-exercise lift in actually both estrogen and testosterone. Both of those rise after a really good weight session. Have I answered your question? Have I forgotten anything? What were we?
You know what? It was a multi-piece question. So you've done a beautiful job on that first piece. The second piece was really the effect of estrogen and even testosterone, of all of these different hormones, on the integrity of the muscle, the tissue, the ligaments,
yes,
tendons, right?
Yes. So these are often forgotten.
Yeah.
These are often forgotten, and
because we just think of build, but what about the health of the tissues so that you can push yourself?
So the good news is when we are stimulating the muscular system, so through something like a resistance training, you're lifting a weight and you're doing the bicep curl, let's say, through a variety of enzymatic processes, we are also stimulating the bone, fibroblastic growth factor. There's all of these different factors and enzymatic reactions that are also going to drive bone density. So this is something I always talk about, like muscles and bones are kind of like sisters, right? So when you have a lot of one, the likelihood of you having a lot of the other is also very high. It's very rare that you might see, there may be some there might be some genetic disease, but very, very rare that you would see someone who has a good amount of muscle mass with frail, weak, bones, right? They sort of, as one goes up, the other goes up. There's sort of there's a proportional or like a direct relationship between the two. In terms of tendons and ligaments, these are, when we think about, as a chiropractor, I can say when I was dealing with rehab and injuries, these are the ones that lag behind, right? So the muscle has a very good blood supply. The bone, for the most part, very good blood supply, the bone marrow, the stem cells, all the things. But tendons and ligaments take, for anyone who's had an injury, a shoulder injury, ACL injury, which actually women are much more susceptible to having ACL injuries and knee injuries, let's say, than our male counterparts are, takes forever. Part of that is because of the poor vascularization that we see here. And then the other piece to it is the hormonal piece. So estrogen is, again, anabolic hormone. It's involved in the integrity of our tendons and our ligaments. And I actually wrote about this in the Betty Body. As we see estrogen, there's a certain point in the menstrual cycle, probably about day 10, where we see this huge astronomical surge of estradiol. And that can make our ligaments too much estrogen. It's like estrogen, it's Goldilocks. You don't want too little, you don't want too much, you just want it just right. So too much estrogen actually makes the ligaments lax, meaning it makes them kind of loosey-goosey, which can actually put us at more susceptibility for injury.
Sure.
As we see a decline in estrogen over the course of our perimenopausal and certainly our perimenopausal years, that is going to stiffen. We're going to see sort of a stiffening up, like that looseness is going to go away. So now, as the muscles, let's say, are pulling on the bone, if you have an instability or you have a muscle, like a mechanical problem, or even a muscular problem, like your posture or your stability or your ability to sort of sense where your joint is in space is off, you are much more likely in perimenopause and menopause to injure your tendons and ligaments. And this is why we see things like frozen shoulder, very, very common in women in their perimenopausal and menopausal years. So estrogen here, as we are seeing this decline, is making things just a little bit stiffer, and it is putting us at an increased risk for injury.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, right? Like too lax, and that laxity actually kicks in the final stages of pregnancy, right? It's what allows the uterus to open up so that the baby can pass through. Like we want that at certain times of life. But definitely having the opposite, like we know that lack of flexibility is a massive issue as we age and compromises even your ability to build muscle, right? If you're not flexible enough. And I would imagine, does the fascia get affected as well? Because that's
100%.
That's the real rotten tissue, actually. The bone.
Yeah, the fascia is sort of like the saran wrap around everything, right? So if you have long-standing poor mechanics, poor posture, poor proprioception, the fascia is absolutely going to be affected there as well. So mobility work becomes more important. And I will say, in the vein of sort of true, transparency and honesty, like I used to, even in practice, I was like, you know what you all need? You all need to do mobility work. You all need to do yoga. You all need to do your, and I am infallible. So my body doesn't, abide by the same rules that yours does. So, but now as a woman who's in her 40, I'm 46, it's really important for me to get in my mobs. Like I can't just jump into the gym and start working. I need to warm up the joints. I need to do yoga. This is something that I've actually I used to do yoga a lot, more for like the mental benefits, because I literally feel high after I do yoga. But now it's for the flexibility, it's for the pliability, it's for the mobs, right? So very, very important for women to be thinking about mobility and flexibility, as well as strength. Like if there's a couple of different levers, if you will, in being healthy in your 40s and 50s, like cardiopulmonary fitness, right? Your cardiorespiratory fitness, your strength, right? So your explosive power and your strength, your endurance, your flexibility, and your mobility.
100%. And so so this is great. I mean, so obviously, what are your, and we did not talk about this ahead of time, so I'm flying blind a little bit. So what's your perspective on bioidentical hormone replacement therapy? Because that is kind of the obvious, in addition to, I'm starting 20 sentences and not finishing any of them. But in addition to doing all the right things so that your hormones can balance as well as as can be expected. So whether that's exercise or sauna, getting a proper sleep, managing stress, eating a good diet, all those things can help your body naturally to maintain reasonable hormone levels. But there's no doubt that as we're going through menopause, the hormone balance is going to change. Mother Nature has a very specific blueprint, if you will, of how we're going to evolve past our reproductive years. And as a society, our expectations around this have changed. we not only want, and I've heard you talk about this, not only do we want to be amazing moms, but then we want to be amazing grandmothers. And then if at all possible, we want to be the great grandmother that might go out for a hike with her great grandkids, whatever the case may be. And that's even if
that's the dream. That's the dream, baby.
That's right. That's right. That's even if we didn't have our kids in our 20s. So, which most of us at this stage of the game have not, or many of us have not. So what's your stance on this whole issue? Because I know it's still, paradoxically scares the bejesus out of so many women, which sadly, based on a lot of flawed information that's been delivered over the last couple of decades. But this whole area around bioidentical hormone therapy, when do you think is appropriate for women to start thinking about bringing in, let's say, outside help for those hormones?
This is I'm glad we're here. Okay. So, I'm a big fan of hormone replacement therapy.
Okay, so we're on this.
I think that, so I think that the Women's Health Initiative, this was a study done, I think they published it in 2001, really did a disservice, to females in terms of, I don't want to pick apart this. I've actually done a sort of a debunking, if you will, of the Women's Health Initiative on my podcast. So I'll send you the link of that if you want to put that in the show notes for people. But basically, they chose females for the study that were well past menopause. So they were in their the average age, I think, was like 65 or 66. Smokers, obese. So if you were looking for all of the risks for someone to have a cardiovascular event, you would choose a smoker who was obese, right? So,
and put them on synthetic hormones.
And that's yes, and that's the other thing. And then you put them on progestin, not progesterone. It's like you can do. I one of my friends did a really funny reel today, so I'll just take this is from Amy Killen.
Yeah,
she was like tomato, potato, progesterone, progestin.
I love it.
Not the same. They're not the same.
Yeah.
So I'm a big fan of bioidenticals. And honestly, if bioidenticals are not doing it, like I would, if for me, I would say personally, my choice would be if bioidenticals, if I'm taking, my estradiols and it's not working for me, progesterone, I would be looking at Premarin. I'd be looking at some of the synthetic ones as well. Yeah. So, I think that when we look at the data, lifestyle interventions like nutrition, like fitness that we've been talking about, stress management, are going to help the vast majority of women. So it looks like somewhere between 50 to 70% of women are going to show amelioration of some of these common, signs and symptoms, clinical signs and symptoms that we see in perimenopause. So the hot flashes, the aberrant mood changes, sleep disturbances, etc. However, that still leaves 30 to 50% of the population that is not, even though they are implementing some of these things, not finding benefit. So, or still not seeing benefit enough to sort of improve their quality of life. Mm-hmm. So I'm a fan of hormones. I think that should be absolutely integrated, and there should be a conversation with your primary healthcare provider. That might be your medical doctor, that might be your naturopath, that might be anybody who is licensed, nurse practitioner, anyone who is sort of licensed to be talking to you about hormones and prescribing them for you. And I would say that if in an ideal world, so like unicorns, sparkles, and rainbows, you would actually be doing blood work twice a year.
Yeah.
So that means that from about age 35, even earlier, honestly, but like most women are like busy having babies and building out their career and all that stuff. But if you can, around the time 35, somewhere between 35 and 40, get some kind of baseline for you, some kind of baseline of progesterone, some kind of baseline of estradiol, some kind of baseline of testosterone, then you can monitor that over time. Mm-hmm. Because my levels of testosterone are going to be different from your levels of testosterone, which is why some of these sort of normal ranges become insignificant at best and not useful at worst, because they're not actually taking into account the bio-individuality of the patient in front of them. So tracking your own levels at the very minimum once a year, but twice a year is better, so that over time, if you are tracking your cycle and you're getting regular blood work, you can communicate that data to your doctor. Remember, your doctor has probably 500 other patients that they're taking care of. Often they don't have 45 minutes or an hour to chat with you. So you have to be able to come in. And I know that that's unfortunate, and we can untangle the problems in our healthcare, maybe another podcast, but the reality is your doctor has about 10 minutes with you. You need to be able to come prepared, right? So you need to be able to come and say, this is my cycle. My cycle has been like this for 3 years. Every day it's like 20, I'm a 28.5 day girl, and it's been like that. And then the last 6 months, it has been like, it's dropped from 28 to 25. And I'm also having sleep disturbances at this and such and such and such. You need to be able to come to your doctor with that information so that she or he can have a data-based, evidence-based conversation with you. And that conversation should include hormones.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's as simple as that. And unfortunately, you'll still find like a lot of women listening to this are going to be like, yeah, but my doctor's going to tell me, it's going to increase my, risk for a heart attack, or I'm a breast cancer survivor, or there's all of these different permutations. And certainly you have to take into account your personal history, with your primary. But you still should be having the conversation. And if if your libido has tanked, if you have hot flashes, if your quality of life has reduced and you're doing all the right things, you're eating clean, you're lifting, you're managing your stress, and your doctor is refusing to talk to you about hormones, with respect, find another doctor.
Yeah. Yeah. Amen. No, I think that's I remember having a conversation with a doctor who we mutually fired each other because I was using bioidentical compounded hormones, and she basically, was very upset and said, I will not take medical responsibility for this. And I said, okay, that's not a problem.
Yes. Yeah.
You don't need to.
This is maybe another conversation, but I can't tell you in our help desk that we have women that are like, my doctor's refusing to do a full thyroid panel on me.
No,
so it's like, how are you going to talk to them about hormones when they won't even look for someone's like, a third of my eyebrow isn't there. And like, I'm gaining weight for no reason, and I'm freezing all the time. And all they're doing is taking a TSH, maybe like a free T3 and a free T4.
Maybe.
It's like, you actually need to be looking for the antibodies there.
Yeah. Or reverse T3. You need to be. So
Right.
You brought up such a great point. And unfortunately or fortunately, and I don't know that the US is that different than Canada unless you're in a concierge medicine practice where you're paying a lot of money and the provider takes an hour to sit with you. But we are in a position now with the medical system that most of us are dealing with, is you do have to become educated enough that you can walk in the door with exactly what you talked about. We need, and it's part of the reason why these podcasts and so many great programs out there help women and even men to become so much more educated about what they should be looking for so that they can assist and become a partner with their doctor in managing their optimal healthcare. And I think
it's not a luxury.
It's a necessity. And I think if anybody, and even in disease, like if anybody who's landed in a hospital in the last, I don't know how long, but certainly in the last 15 to 20 years, you better have somebody on board with you who's going to advocate for you and keep an eye on things and monitor what's going on, because all the systems are under stress in the system. And so we now need to step up for ourselves and for our loved ones to be much more vocal and active participants in managing this health journey and longevity journey that we're all on. And so the idea of walking into the doctor's office with data points and kind of letting go of the idea that your doctor has to be an all-knowing, all-seeing entity that's just going to know what you need.
Yeah, they're a human with kids at home and deadlines and bills to pay, and they're distracted potentially just as much as you are.
Yeah.
So you need to be able to dial in their focus to exactly what you want.
Yeah, 100%. So great. So hormone therapy, and the one thing we didn't talk about, and maybe we want to talk about it a little bit, is the other piece of the puzzle that kind of slides during this hormonal kind of transition through perimenopause and menopause is cognitive health. And that is our ability to think clearly and to remember things and part of that is sleep. If your sleep goes south, your brain's not going to function. I'm tripping over my words today because I got home from a trip at 4:30 in the morning this morning. And so I I've done all the things that I can do to sharpen my brain. But there's a point where lack of sleep, even one night, is enough to send your brain sideways a little bit. But certainly losing the progesterone, which negatively impacts your sleep, but estrogen. And I don't know to what degree even testosterone affects brain function. I know estrogen gets a lot of talk in this area.
Yeah, I would say, so there's a lot of women that I've either worked with, consulted with, or have just sort of in passing, as they're moving. It usually happens sort of later in their 40s. So like mid to late 40s, where they'll say things like, I have way more anxiety than like things bother me a lot. Or I used to be so confident, about myself or about making decisions, and I'm not that way anymore. I feel like I used to like own the boardroom or whatever. Used to I call them like my boardroom Betties, right? It's like you walk in and you just like own it, right?
Yeah.
So in their late 40s or 50s, they feel like they're becoming more of these little meek little mice, versus the sort of powerful woman that they were. And that is you can directly trace that back to testosterone. So testosterone is what helps us. It gives us confidence. It helps us, excuse me. It helps us make decisions, to evaluate risk. And so the declining levels of testosterone can absolutely impact our many aspects of our personality, right? Even our, when we talk about declining estrogen, as you mentioned, our vernacular, our ability to communicate, part of that, there's estrogen and testosterone receptors like everywhere in the body, but in the brain, our communication skills, our ability to read faces, our ability to sort of read the room, if you will, that's a lot of that. There's other factors, but a lot of that is estrogen. Wow. So some of these things become more difficult as we, reading the room, analyzing risk and making a decision. These things become more difficult for women. A lot of women will also talk about brain fog and forgetting things.
Yeah.
I'm walking into a room and I have no idea why I'm there. There is some research, Dr. Lisa Mosconi and her body of work talks about this neurological pruning that happens as we're in those perimenopausal years and as we're moving through menopause. In the same way, during other pertinent times of our lives, when you mentioned pregnancy, we all know about like the baby brain, right? Where like the mom, all she can focus on is her baby or her pregnancy, like after she's given birth. That's part of that is part of that is hormonally driven, but a lot of that is neurologically driven because you're trying to ensure the success of the offspring. So you can't focus on career. You can't focus on the messy house or whatever. You're just focused on the baby. So the same thing happens for us as we are moving through perimenopause and menopause. You no longer need those neurons that are involved in the survival of your offspring. When you're 50, your children, depending on the age you've had them, somewhere in their teens and their 20s, maybe just got accepted to law school, as you were mentioning, right? They're adults.
Yeah.
So we don't need to be focusing. We don't need that brain power, that neural power anymore to be focused there. So what does your body do? Use it or lose it. You prune. The brain is becoming more efficient because now we have neurons and sort of feedback loops and energy and resources diverted to these pathways that no longer are required. So rather than, so a lot of women, it can be very painful for some women, right? It's the brain fog, it's the confusion, it's the anxiety. It's like, I don't feel like myself anymore. And then you layer on top of that, the sort of the generalized cultural view that once you're no longer fertile, you're useless, right? It's like never age. It's like the America Ferrera soliloquy from Barbie. It's like never age and always be thin and always be nice and always do this and that. So you layer on all of those things and a woman is going to feel like she's beside herself. And then for many women, they suffer for many, many years. So this is, just kind of piggybacking on what we were just talking about. This is where hormone therapy can be very, very important. Stress management also becomes incredibly important during this time because your ovaries are essentially retiring. Your ovaries are essentially saying, listen, I've been working for you for 40 years. I'm retiring, I'm getting my Rolex, and I'm going to the Bahamas. I'm not doing anything else, right? So it's the adrenals who have to take over the job now of what the ovaries once did, and also take care of their regular functions as well. So the adrenals they will always be producing some of our sex hormones, but they, after menopause, do all of it.
Yeah.
Right. So you really do have to have your stress management in place. A lot of women that I speak to, and maybe it's just I attract the same type of woman that I am, have a really hard time with things like meditation, have a really hard time. Like that's the one lever. It's like the stress management piece is like, I can get to the gym and I can do the cardio and I can do the nutrition, but the stress piece is really difficult for me. And this is part of the reason why I've taken up yoga, because I try so hard to meditate and it's so hard for me. It's like, I don't know if Nat, if you're the same, but it's so hard for me to do that.
I think part of the challenge with meditation is it involves stopping. And
yes.
You know what it is? And so we're so programmed to go, 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 go. This idea of stopping and not doing, whether even 10 minutes or 20 minutes is a real challenge, right? But, going back to the cognitive changes, I think that, and not to add more to people's plate, to anybody's plate, but what I found was helpful for me moving through that stage was, first of all, I had the blessing of getting into this industry in my early 40s as I was kind of transitioning myself, and leaning into learning about neuroplasticity, learning about things like lion's mane mushroom, like nutrition that was going to feed my brain. Not to mention this idea of neuroplasticity, which is what you just said a minute ago, use it or lose it. Now let's learn a skill. Let's lean into something that interests us. Let's use the brain, because the body is really clear about this. And this goes for muscle, it goes for bone, it goes for brain. If you don't use it, if you don't show your body that you need it, it's going to be like, look, we're about efficiency here. We're about keeping you alive. We don't care what you look like. We don't really care if you're thinking clear. Well, we care if you're thinking clearly, because it'll be hard for you to stay alive if you're not thinking clearly. But if you're not going to use it, especially if it's a metabolically expensive tissue, which is muscle and brain, we're gonna pare back, right? So that we can put our resources where we think that we need it. And so this idea of, and as I'm saying it, I'm like, I'm not telling you to go out and learn a new language at a time when you're in the sandwich generation and you're going through all these hormonal changes and stuff, but definitely reframing this time as an opportunity to lean into using your brain differently, learning something different. And it could be exercise. Frankly, it could be salsa dancing, but
it could be. Yeah, I love that. I was gonna make a joke about let's be friends on Duolingo, because that's like my big, I was talking to a neuroscientist and he was like, yeah, one of the best ways to sort of keep your brain alive is to struggle, right? So is to in the struggle is actually where we create new neurons, right? When you're learning a new language, we remember, if you've had children, they started off with like mama, papa, baba, whatever, whatever language they're growing up in. And then it's like, it's 2-word sentences and it's 3-word sentences. So in something like Duolingo, or in learning a language or learning a new skill, it could be a motor skill. You could learn how to bake. You could be learning how to paint. You could be learning, pottery class. There's going to be frustration because you haven't acquired the automaticity to it yet.
Yeah.
But in that frustration is actually where we birth new neurons, right? So when you're getting frustrated with the French language, because I always do, I'm like, how is this little word? How are there so many little words that don't actually mean anything?
I can help you with that.
And I'm a Francophile, so I love everything French. But there's times in Duolingo I'm like, why? Where is this word coming from? Doesn't make any sense, even in the syntax, whatever. So we'll have an offline conversation about.
That's like French people trying to learn how to spell in English. I mean,
yes,
really.
Yes. So anything that causes frustration, it could be going to the gym for the first time, like feeling totally overwhelmed by all the machines and all the noises and all the people. All of that is going to birth new brain growth. You're going to have neuroplasticity, right? That neuronal, like you're going to be just making new neurons.
Yeah.
So finding something, because now your children don't need 100% of your attention anymore. You are, this is why menopause often is referred to as the second spring, because now you have this opportunity to actually say, okay, I'm going to be here I got at least 40 to 50% of my life left. So what is it that I actually want to be doing? I've spent the last several decades serving other people, serving little people who I love, maybe serving, a career or a husband or, whatever, your community. What is it that I actually really love? Is it travel? Is it languages? Is it, a new motor skill set? Like you said, salsa dancing, Zumba class, whatever it is. How can you actually get closer to who you already are, but you've maybe been ignoring because you've been in service to other people?
Yeah, no, I really love that. And so it's all these little pieces of the puzzle that come together that help us through the transition and to see it as an evolution instead of a nightmare. Right. And it so often it gets framed as, this kind of nightmare stage of life. And I think that as women and as a community of women, and we have so many beautiful voices in this space. I mean, there's yours, you mentioned Dr. Amy Killen, who's amazing. There's Dr. Carrie Jones. And not only are they bringing their big brains and huge knowledge to the space, but they bring it with humor and compassion and empathy. And I do think that we're in a time right now where it's never been a better time to go through these transitions, because there's so many women they've kind of picked up the challenge and they've stopped, we've kind of stopped lamenting a little bit the lack of scientific research and clinical data, as we were talking about earlier, and double-blind studies. And you know what? Those are great for some stuff. But I actually think in many ways we're going to be better served by the direction we're going in right now, which is in the moment, in practice, clinical, like what's happening, what is serving women, what is working for them.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that for some people, it is a choke point when they are saying, I just want evidence. I just want the literature to be able to inform my decisions. Or, if you're a coach or a doctor, like I want to have this information to sort of inform my care plans for my patients or my programs for my clients. And women are not, we're not algorithms. There's so much you can't. In some ways, I'm a big fan of science. I hang my hat up on scientific inquiry. But at the end of the day, science is never settled. It continues to evolve, and I know that there are, hundreds, if not millions of women who have been, I'm thinking specifically about, there's a lot of people who will say, oh, there's nothing, the menstrual cycle doesn't do anything in terms of your performance or your training. And it's like, it's usually men who say that, right? So the first thing is like, what women love the most in life is when men explain to them about their periods. So that's, we just love that, right? But the other thing is that lack of evidence is not evidence of lack, right? It's just that the scientific literature is just not there. It's usually anywhere from 10 to 20 years behind anyway. So I would say that, yes, scientific inquiry is important, but to your point, clinical practice, the clinical experience of the clinician, let's say, and then just even when there isn't, I'm writing an article right now about cold plunging and females. Do you know how much literature there is in PubMed? And I've done almost, I think there's one.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. But everything is so cold plunge. Nothing specifically about women. What's the protocol for women? No one's looked at it.
And?
Well, I think
I'm curious because I personally hate cold plunge. I think it's my ethnic background. My people never had to deal with this cold bullshit.
What's your ethnic background?
I'm Moroccan.
You're Moroccan. Okay.
So
okay.
I'm
so you're like, my people don't know this. No, we
do this business. Put me in a sauna. I'm all in. I'll do the heat shock proteins till the cows come home. But don't put me in, and I've done cold plunging when I've had to. But it's just
Okay, so I'll tell you what I've come up with. So I too, my people too. My people also dislike the cold. My background, my father's from Portugal, and then my mother's family is from Lebanon. So
there you go.
We are also like warm-blooded, very passionate people. So I'm like you. I'm like, I can stay in the hot. I can do, so you take that, you take that genetics, you plop it in Toronto when there's, winter for 6 months of the year, and here you go. But I actually am a big fan of cold plunging, insofar as the mental resilience and the grit that it gives you. There is a slight metabolic benefit. I wouldn't hang my hat on it, but we do, in keeping you warm while you're in the plunge and then the warming up afterwards. And there is a beiging effect to the white fat. So we do see white fat tends to turn more brown, like it tends to have more density of mitochondria, making it more metabolically active. Okay. But for women, it's a little different. So for women, we tend to be more sensitive to the cold. So we get colder faster.
Yeah.
So when you see, I don't want to say bros, but I'm just going to say it. Like, when we see these bros that are like cold plunging and they're like, it's 0 degrees Celsius, or it's, 12 degrees, or, it's like 2 degrees Celsius outside. Like that's very, very cold for a woman. Mm-hmm. So I have a cold plunge at home and I usually keep it. So I'm thinking in Celsius, but I'll do my best to convert this to Fahrenheit as well. So I keep it at 13 degrees centigrade, which is about 55 Fahrenheit.
So that's that sweet spot, right? It's 55 and below is where you're going to get the benefits.
Yeah, but for women, it doesn't need to be much colder than that. I don't need to go in a 37 degree Fahrenheit tub to get the benefits. I'm going to start shivering earlier than and my husband does it with me. So we will set the cold plunge at the same. I'll go in first, then he goes in, like we wait for it to cool down a little bit and then he'll go back in. And he doesn't get as cold as I do, but I shiver. So at 13 Celsius or 55 Fahrenheit, I'm shivering. I stay in there for about 8 to 12 minutes, depending on where I am in my cycle.
Yeah.
My luteal phase, I'm warmer. So it's a welcome relief during that time. But no one has looked at where a woman is in her menstrual cycle versus a cold plunge. So I'd say about 55 degrees, Fahrenheit would be like a great time for women. You don't need to stay in there as long. The other thing that has come up in the literature, I will say, is that the immune benefits that we see from cold plunging seem to be lower in women than they are with men. So men seem to derive a greater benefit from cold plunging, both the neurological, like the release of dopamine and all those sort of bliss chemicals, and the immune function afterwards. So women, the response is a bit attenuated. That doesn't mean that it doesn't happen and there's no benefit. It just means it's a smaller.
And it's not the same, is the point.
It's not the same. It's not the same.
Yeah.
Is there benefit? Yes, but we have to do it differently, right? We have to do it differently. So that's an example of very, very slim pickings in the research. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing I'll actually add to that is often it's said like never cold plunge after exercise, because you're getting rid of some of the adaptive properties that exercise is actually pro-inflammatory acutely, right? And then the adaptations. So that's fine. I agree with that. And little asterisks, right? Women post-exercise, we tend to vasodilate. So would you ever get like tomato face, like when you're working out, like your face is like super, super red?
Yeah.
Men don't actually have that. Like they tend to actually vasoconstrict really well post-exercise. So they don't get the tomato face. They don't get super red everywhere. Women tend to vasodilate such that our blood tends to pool in the periphery for longer. So in the skin, away from the muscles, the tendons, the ligaments, the joints, the discs that need them for repair.
Yeah.
So actually a coolish,
cold plunge.
Yeah.
It'll drive
a coolish cold plunge, maybe an hour or, you get your heart rate settled and all that after your workout for women seems to be promising as a way to, as a recovery tool to help direct the blood away from the skin, like away from the surface and into the areas that we need it. Interesting, right? But no one's really.
But you're saying coolish. So when you say coolish, do you mean 55 degrees coolish, or do you think like a cool shower, like 65 degrees?
I mean, it depends on the individual, right? For me, a coolish is 55 degrees. So I'm gonna get into a 55 degree, 13 degrees Celsius bath, an hour or two of my cold plunge tub, like an hour or two after I exercise. And I don't think that is going to affect my adaptations to the exercise in any way.
Well, and you're case in point, you're doing great. I've seen videos of you in the gym. You're doing all right.
Yeah, I work my butt off. Like, I'm not going to get in as soon as I get home. I'm going to I'm going to cool down, red face is, my red face is going to be but I'm going to help as a recovery tool. I'm going to help direct some of that muscle, some of that blood, let's say, into the muscle.
Yeah. Back to where you needed to do the work.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that was a welcome little tidbit that I didn't think we were going to go to cold plunge. What about sauna? See, the thing is, we're in the world of extreme temperature adaptations, so we get benefits at both sides. And actually, before we move on to sauna, with the cold plunge for women who are still cycling, you mentioned this a little bit in the luteal phase. It might be more welcome. Is there a time in a woman's cycle when she should kind of maybe not cold plunge as much?
So I'll pre-frame this by saying that I am right now, I don't think that I have a lot of strong literature to stand on.
Yeah.
I will say that the first thing that you want to do is you want to check in with yourself and see, you want to auto-regulate. And that's actually true for exercise. It's true for cold plunging. It's true for sauna, any type of stressor. Okay. We always want to say, how am I feeling today? So in my book, for example, I talk about really pushing it, like doing those heavy, heavy weights in the follicular phase, like after bleed week, when your testosterone is rising. Today, at the time of this recording, I'm exactly at day 10 in my cycle. So really when I should push it. And I got to the gym this morning and I was like, I don't have it. Didn't sleep well last night, for whatever, so that is an example of me saying, here's the ideal scenario. And then here's the application in life, right? Didn't sleep really well last night. I don't really have it in me to lift heavy weights. If I do, I feel like I might tweak something, or I might try to push it when I shouldn't. So I did moderate weights today. So I'll say auto-regulation is the sort of the number one priority that we want to be thinking about. So, with sauna, I would say the same is true. Like in all the extremes, I think it's the same for women here as well. We don't need the high, like the 180, 200 degrees Fahrenheit sauna in order to reap the benefits. I think that the temperatures can be lower for us. And I think that we actually reap, most of the benefits in a shorter amount of time. So we don't need to be in the sauna for an hour. You can be in there for 20 minutes, 40 minutes, and you're going to get great benefits from it at a shorter amount of time as well.
Right. Love it. That's, I can be in the sauna longer, but at the same time, understanding for people who are time pressed, which is almost everybody these days, what's the minimal effective dose, right? So maybe as we kind of wind down on the episode, let's maybe talk a little bit about minimum effective dose for weights, for, exercise in general. And, and sorry, my dog just came back from her walk. She's dissing the dog bed and just lay down on my treadmill.
Oh, nice. Nice. Yeah. I would say for exercise, minimum effective dose, I would say if you are someone who's not regularly weight training right now, just do one day, right? Like 1 or 2 days a week, minimum effective dose. I think that you'll probably start to see some really good results at 3 days a week, probably full body at that point. I would argue that as you adapt to 3 days a week, I would probably want to see that number jump to 4. So like 3 is good, 4 is much better than 3. In terms of cardiorespiratory fitness, as someone who sort of grew up in the cardio bunny era, I would say that don't use cardio for fat loss. That's not why you want to use. That's not why you want to be doing it. You want to be doing it for your cardiopulmonary system. You want to be doing it for your heart health. The number one killer for women is not breast cancer. It's heart attacks. It's heart disease. Yeah. And for women, we won't get into this now, but often, again, the symptoms for a heart attack for a woman can be distinct from that. It's not the shooting pain in the left arm that we're all sort of taught in school. For women, it can be really bad indigestion, a really bad headache. Oftentimes women are turned away from, they're like, this is the worst headache of my life. And they'll go to the emergency and they're often turned away. So cardiovascular disease is the reason why you want to be thinking about your heart health all through your life, but particularly as we are in menopause. So we want to be doing somewhere, the recommended numbers, somewhere between 120 to 150 minutes of like a combination of zone 1 and 2 training. I personally think, and I'm doing some research on this now. I haven't even spoken publicly about this yet, but I will be. I don't actually think that we need to be doing as much zone 2. We already have more type 1 fibers than our male counterparts do. So to get a little bit nerdy just for a sec, type 1 fibers, very oxidative. It's like if you and I are going for a walk, if I actually went to your place in Toronto and we went for a walk together, we could walk. Yeah, what a concept. We could walk for several hours. Right. And that is using that's our slow twitch muscle fibers. Okay. So those are highly oxidative. Those are fat burning. Women have more type 1 fibers than they do type 2. Type 2 fibers are the fast twitch. These are the speed, burst, explosive fibers, if you will. They are utilized in weight training. They're also utilized in things like sprints and burpees and any type of explosive movement. So I know that there's lots of people online that talk about this 120 to 150 minutes per week. And I don't think that women need as much of that zone 2 training because we are already well adapted to what, if you think about it from an evolutionary perspective, we were the original ruckers. Like I know Michael Easter talks about rucking and it's this big thing. It's like, you know what we've been doing forever? Carrying babies on our backs. You know how much babies weigh? 10 to 15 pounds. It's usually the size of a rucksack. So we are the original ruckers. We are very well adapted for that zone 2 oxidative phosphorylation where we're burning fat. Where I think that we need to put more of our focus on is the explosive, the type 2 muscle fibers, because we lose starting, it's like 35 to 40, we start losing speed, like that burst, much quicker. Like you always hear the stats, like you lose 1% of lean muscle mass per year. And, that's 10% in a decade. Yes. And you can lose up to 8% of your type 2 muscle fibers per annum, per year, if you are not training them. So you can see how you can get very slow, very quickly.
Yeah.
So I think it's more important for women to be thinking about burst training, explosive training. The other thing I'll say about burst and explosive training is that it's anabolic. It's the only cardio that is anabolic. All other like the zone 2 low intensity is catabolic. It breaks things down, right? When you are sprinting on a treadmill, doing burpees, whatever, this is all building. It's building muscle. It's building this type, and specifically the type 2 muscle fibers. So I don't know exactly what my recommendation is at this point. I'm still very heavy in the research. I didn't actually think we were going to go here, but I'm writing quite a bit on it right now. But I don't think that women need as much zone 2 training as we often see. Again, like the Hubermans and and God love Andrew, love what he's doing for science and awareness, but he's basing a lot of the data that he talks about, and as not just him, many others, on male-dominated research. I don't think women need as much zone 2 training.
Well, and I think to your point, like the HIIT training, that's part of the HIIT training, like the high intensity interval training, which allows you, and I think that, interestingly enough, I spent a lot of time training women in gyms too, and women are also very intimidated by anything that when you say high intensity, because maybe they haven't been exercising for as long. But one of the things I spent a lot of time explaining to my clients is high intensity is relative to where you are.
Absolutely. Just like a heavy weight. What is heavy weight? It means something to you, different to me. Yes, please. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's okay. I mean, it's what is it going to make you red in the face, sweat, lose your breath? What does it for you may not do it for me, but what does it for me probably won't do it for you. And so understanding, helping people to get started in these places without being completely overwhelmed by the prospect of it is understanding that wherever you start is where you need to be. The point is to just continue to progress through it. And I haven't read your book yet, but I'll get my hands on it at some point. But I'm pretty sure the Betty Body makes that point. That is that wherever you are beginning is going to be the place that's going to get you to where you need to be, because the body doesn't, I don't think that it's not like you need to put 200 pounds on your back to build bone. You need to challenge your bone to build bone.
Absolutely. More so than what it's used to now.
Exactly.
So And I think for many women, it's so intimidating to be a beginner.
Yeah.
It's so intimidating. When I was coaching my healthcare practitioners, I'm like, you got to be okay with sucking for a bit. Like, it's okay to suck. It's okay to be a beginner, because you're just learning all of this stuff, right? And the same is true for patients. It's okay to not know exactly what the right glute exercise is, or maybe your squat technique isn't 100% on form, but you're doing something, and that is going to provide you with the form and the platform to improve if you are, so inclined to want to improve. So I think that, your point is well taken, and it's okay to be a beginner. It's okay to not know exactly what's in front of you, and not to have it all planned out, and not have the whole charts and all the Excel spreadsheets. It's okay to just start and take perfectly imperfect action.
Love it. Beautiful. Well, I think that's actually a great place to kind of close this first conversation. I'm hopeful we'll have more because, of course, I had a laundry list of things to talk about. We really leaned into a couple of topics, but actually, I think that's a good thing because you can lean in a little deeper and then move on to the next thing next time. So, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. Why don't we tell people more about where they can find you, where they can get their hands on your book, and what's coming up next for Dr. Stephanie Estima's universe?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, the first couple of ways that you can interact with me are just like no cost on Instagram. I'm there pretty regularly. So it's just Dr. First Name, Last Name, Dr. Stephanie Estima on Instagram. I have, as of this recording, just started a newsletter, a free newsletter, for talking about all of these things, the cold plunges, the zone 2 training, all this kind of stuff, like these female centric issues for women in perimenopause and menopause. So you can get over to my website, drstephanieestima.com /newsletter. And there's like a little sign up button there. We send that out weekly. And then all the old newsletters are going to be on that website, like on that site as well. So those are sort of the no cost, if you want, ways. And I guess the other no cost way would be my podcast. I am a fellow podcaster, as you are. The podcast is called Better with Dr. Stephanie. So those are 3 places to start. And then if you want to pick up my book, any good bookstore, so Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all the places. It's called The Betty Body. We named the book. People are always like, what's Betty? Who's Betty? It's named after the podcast. So Better, my community members started calling themselves Betties.
Yeah.
Like, I'm a Betty. And I was like, oh, that's just the cutest. And it speaks to my vintage heart. And, so I was like, okay, Betty it is. So, the Betty Body is how to eat and train and sleep according to your menstrual cycle. So you can pick that up at any good bookstore. So those are the places right now that I have for people to come into my world
and geek out with you.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much. This has been a total pleasure. And I look forward to the next time we get to talk again.
Thank you so much. It's been great.